What if the greatest gift humanity possesses is actually our greatest curse? Imagine waking up to realize that consciousness, the very thing that makes you uniquely you, is nothing more than a cosmic accident, a glitch in the universe's code. There's a philosopher who believed exactly this, a thinker so radical that his ideas challenge everything we hold sacred about human existence. This isn't science fiction. This isn't pessimistic rambling. This is the philosophy of Thomas Ligotti, a man who dared to ask the most unsettling question of all. What if becoming aware was nature's cruelest mistake? Today, we descend into a philosophy that will disturb you, provoke you, and perhaps make you question the very value of your own thoughts. Welcome to a journey into one of the darkest corners of philosophical thought. Thomas Ligotti, a horror fiction writer turned philosopher, presented a thesis in his work, The Conspiracy Against the Human Race, that consciousness is not a blessing, but a biological aberration. Unlike other animals who live purely in the present moment, humans are cursed with self-awareness, an awareness that brings existential dread, the knowledge of death, and the burden of meaning-making in a meaningless universe. Ligotti draws from philosophers like Arthur Schopenhauer and Cioran, building upon their pessimistic traditions to construct something even more radical. He argues that consciousness created a rift between humanity and nature, trapping us in a prison of our own minds. We became too aware for our own good, and this awareness has made us the most suffering species on the planet. But before we explore this abyss together, I need you to engage with this conversation. Drop a comment below with your first reaction to this idea. Does it terrify you, intrigue you, anger you? Hit that like button if you're ready to challenge your assumptions, and subscribe because we're diving deep into philosophy that most channels won't touch. Let's begin. To understand Ligotti's philosophy, we must first grasp what makes consciousness such a unique phenomenon. Every living creature on Earth operates within its environment, responding to stimuli, seeking food, reproducing, and avoiding danger. But somewhere along the evolutionary timeline, something unprecedented happened in the human brain. We became aware that we are aware. This metacognition, this ability to think about thinking, separated us from every other species. A deer doesn't contemplate its own mortality while grazing. A dolphin doesn't experience existential crisis about the meaning of its existence. But humans, we're trapped in an endless loop of self-reflection. Ligotti argues this wasn't an evolutionary advantage, it was a catastrophic mutation. Think about it. Consciousness gave us the ability to anticipate our own death, to feel the weight of past regrets, to anxiety about an uncertain future. We're the only species that can be physically safe yet psychologically tormented. We invented the concept of suffering beyond physical pain. This self-awareness created what Ligotti calls the malignantly useless. We became too intelligent for simple survival, yet not intelligent enough to escape the prison of our own minds. We're aware of our cosmic insignificance, but psychologically incapable of accepting it. This contradiction is the source of all human misery. Consider the human condition. We create elaborate systems of meaning, religion, philosophy, art, science, all to distract ourselves from the fundamental truth that consciousness revealed. We're biological machines that became aware of our own machinery, and that awareness broke us. We can't go back to instinctual living, but we can't transcend our biological limitations either. Ligotti points to the prevalence of mental illness, depression, and anxiety as evidence. These aren't anomalies, they're natural responses to the burden of consciousness. The healthy human mind is one that has successfully deluded itself, created enough distractions and meaning narratives to avoid confronting the horror of pure awareness. We're all running from the implications of our own consciousness. This is why Ligotti calls consciousness a cosmic error. It's a feature that emerged without purpose, creating a creature uniquely capable of suffering in ways no other organism can. We're accidents becoming aware of our own accidentality, and that recursive awareness is the ultimate trap. If consciousness is an error, then being human is inherently horrific. Ligotti doesn't use horror as hyperbole, he means it literally. The human experience, when stripped of its comforting illusions, is fundamentally a horror story where you are both the victim and the monster. Think about the daily human experience through this lens. You wake up every morning knowing you're one day closer to death. You work at jobs that often feel meaningless to afford a life you're not sure has purpose. You form relationships knowing they'll end, either through separation or death. You pursue happiness knowing it's temporary and often elusive. This is the human condition. Ligotti draws heavily from Arthur Schopenhauer's concept of the will to live, a blind, purposeless force that drives all existence. But while Schopenhauer saw some escape through aesthetic contemplation and compassion, Ligotti offers no such consolation. Consciousness has made us aware of the will but powerless to escape it. We're puppets who can see the strings but can't cut them. The horror intensifies when you realize that humans are the only species that actively contemplates suicide. This isn't a bug, it's a feature of consciousness. Only an organism aware enough to grasp its own existence can conceive of ending it. The fact that suicide exists, that we had to develop moral and religious frameworks to prevent it, reveals how unbearable consciousness can be. Yet society demands we pretend everything is fine. We're expected to celebrate life, find meaning, be productive, stay positive. Ligotti sees these social pressures as a conspiracy, a collective delusion necessary to keep the species functioning. If everyone acknowledged the true horror of consciousness simultaneously, civilization would collapse. So we lie to each other and ourselves. This brings us to what Ligotti calls the puppet metaphor. We're biological puppets animated by forces we don't control, DNA we didn't choose, circumstances we didn't select. But we're conscious enough to believe we're the ones in control. This illusion of agency, of free will, is perhaps consciousness's cruelest trick. We're responsible for lives we never asked to live, making choices in a system we never consented to enter. The horror isn't that life is meaningless. The horror is that consciousness makes us desperately crave meaning in a universe constitutionally incapable of providing it. We're meaning-seeking machines in a meaning-absent cosmos, and that mismatch is the source of a uniquely human form of suffering. Here's where Ligotti's philosophy becomes truly controversial. He argues that society, culture, and even philosophy itself are engaged in a massive conspiracy to hide the truth about consciousness. This isn't a deliberate conspiracy with meaning and agendas. It's an emergent conspiracy, a collective unconscious agreement to never acknowledge what consciousness really means. Look at the dominant narratives in almost every culture. Life is a gift. Consciousness is special. Humans are the crown of creation. Existence is fundamentally good or meaningful. These aren't objective truths, Ligotti argues. They're survival mechanisms. Species that evolved consciousness had to simultaneously evolve psychological defense mechanisms, or they would have gone extinct immediately. Philosophy itself is often complicit in this conspiracy. From ancient times to the present, most philosophers have sought to justify existence, to find meaning, to construct systems that make consciousness bearable. Even existentialism, which acknowledges absurdity, usually ends with some form of life-affirming conclusion. Sartre says we're condemned to be free, but at least we can create our own meaning. Camus says we must imagine Sisyphus happy. Ligotti calls this intellectual dishonesty. Why must we imagine Sisyphus happy? Why can't we acknowledge that pushing a boulder up a hill for eternity is actually terrible, and that consciousness makes it worse by allowing Sisyphus to understand the futility of his task? The conspiracy insists we find silver linings, that we make the best of it. But what if the most honest response is simply to acknowledge how bad it really is? Religion represents the conspiracy's most elaborate construction. It promises afterlives, reincarnations, cosmic justice, divine plans, anything to make consciousness's burden bearable. It's no coincidence that every major religion emerged after humans developed complex consciousness. These belief systems are sophisticated coping mechanisms, beautiful lies we tell ourselves to avoid the horror of pure awareness in an indifferent universe. Even modern psychology participates in this conspiracy. Depression and anxiety, natural responses to consciousness, are classified as disorders needing treatment. But what if they're not disorders? What if they're correct assessments of the human condition, and it's the happy, optimistic people who are delusional? Ligotti suggests that what we call mental health is often just successful self-deception. The conspiracy operates through what Ligotti calls the MALP, the meaningless affirmation of life principle. It's the unexamined assumption that life is worth living, that consciousness is valuable, that existence is preferable to non-existence. This principle is so deeply embedded in human culture that questioning it is treated as pathological or dangerous. But Ligotti insists this is exactly what must be questioned. If consciousness is truly a cosmic error, then Ligotti reaches a logical, if deeply uncomfortable, conclusion. The most ethical choice would be to not create more conscious beings. This is the philosophy of antinatalism, and Ligotti embraces it fully. Not as a call for forced measures, but as a recognition of what would be most compassionate. Antinatalism argues that bringing a new consciousness into existence is inherently problematic. That person never consented to exist, never asked for the burden of awareness, and will inevitably suffer in ways both predictable and unpredictable. Even if their life contains happiness, it also guarantees pain, disease, loss, and death. By creating new life, we're imposing the horror of consciousness on someone who had no say in the matter. Most people recoil from this idea instinctively. We're biologically programmed to reproduce, evolutionarily wired to see procreation as good and natural. But Ligotti asks us to think beyond our programming. Just because something is natural doesn't make it ethical. Just because we're driven to reproduce doesn't mean we should. Consciousness gives us the ability to override our instincts, yet we refuse to apply that ability to the most fundamental question: should we perpetuate consciousness? The common objection is that life contains good things worth experiencing: love, beauty, achievement, joy. Ligotti counters that all these goods are only necessary because we exist in the first place. You don't need to experience joy if you don't exist to miss it, but you do need to avoid suffering if you do exist. It's an asymmetry. Bringing someone into existence creates the possibility of both good and bad, while not bringing them into existence avoids all bad without creating any actual deprivation. This isn't about hating children or life itself. It's about recognizing that consciousness is a burden we shouldn't impose on others, no matter how successfully we've managed to cope with it ourselves. Every parent essentially says to their child, "I'm giving you this gift of consciousness that you never asked for, and with it comes guaranteed suffering and eventual death. Enjoy." When stated plainly, the ethics become questionable. Ligotti recognizes this philosophy will never be widely adopted. The biological drive to reproduce is too strong, the conspiracy of optimism too entrenched. But he argues that, at minimum, we should be honest about what we're doing when we create new consciousness. We're not giving a gift, we're imposing a burden, and doing so based on our own desires, rather than any consideration for the consciousness we're creating. This is the ultimate conclusion of viewing consciousness as a cosmic error. The error should not be repeated. It's a dark conclusion, but Ligotti argues it's the only logically consistent and ethically honest position once you accept the premise. The question isn't whether antinatalism feels good or sounds appealing. The question is whether it's true. We've journeyed through one of philosophy's darkest territories, exploring Thomas Ligotti's radical claim that consciousness is not a gift, but a cosmic error, a biological mistake that created the most suffering species in Earth's history. Whether you agree or violently disagree, this philosophy forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of existence, the value of awareness, and the ethics of perpetuating consciousness. These aren't just abstract intellectual games, they're questions about the fundamental condition of being human. I want to hear your thoughts. Does Ligotti's philosophy resonate with you, or do you think he's fundamentally wrong? Can consciousness be redeemed, or is he right that awareness itself is the problem? Comment below with your perspective. If this video challenged you intellectually, share it with someone who loves deep philosophical discussions. And remember, the unexamined life may not be worth living, but examining life too closely might reveal truths we're not prepared to face. Until next time, keep questioning everything.